Hello everyone, I am Anantaraju, Assistant Professor of Commerce, Government Postgraduate College for Women, Pavagada. Dear viewers, first of all, I would like to welcome all of you to the online class. In this class, we are going to discuss about the accounting treatment for the joint venture transactions. In the previous videos, we have already discussed about the meaning of joint venture, features of joint venture, and then difference between the joint venture and the partnership, and also the difference between the joint venture and the consignment, and also the methods of treating the joint venture transactions. As you know, there are two methods of maintaining or treating the joint venture transactions. When the separate set of books are maintained, one method is when the separate set of books are maintained, and another method is when the separate set of books are not maintained. In the previous video, we have already discussed about the when the separate set of books are maintained. That means apart from their own books of accounts, when the co-venturers keep record of separate set of books to keep record of the joint venture transactions. In today's class, let us discuss about the another method, that is when each co-venturer don't maintain a separate set of books, and in that too also what are the journal entries to be passed and also what are the ledger accounts to be prepared. Under this method, when the separate set of books are not maintained, there arises two possibilities. So one is each co-venturer may keep record or may make a record of all the transactions. I mean the transactions, that means his own transactions, and also as well as the transactions affected by the other co-venturers. Or instead of making record of all the transactions, each co-venturer may make record of his own transactions only. That is another method. Okay, ಮೇಜರ್ ಮೆಥಡ್ ಯಾವುದಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ವೆನ್ ಸಪ್ರೇಟ್ ಸೆಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಬುಕ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ನಾಟ್ ಮೈಂಟೈನ್ಡ್, ಪ್ರತ್ಯೇಕವಾಗಿರತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳ ನಿರ್ವಹಣೆ ಮಾಡದೆ ತಮ್ಮ ಮುಖ್ಯ ವ್ಯವಹಾರದ ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳಲ್ಲಿಯೇ ಜಂಟಿ ಉದ್ಯಮದ ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳ ನಿರ್ವಹಣೆ, ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳ ವಹಿವಾಟುಗಳನ್ನು ನಮೂದು ಮಾಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಮತ್ತು ಎರಡು ತರಹ ಈ ಕೋವೆಂಚರರ್ಸು ಅಕೌಂಟಿಂಗ್ ಟ್ರೀಟ್ಮೆಂಟನ್ನು ಮಾಡಬಹುದು. ಒಂದು ಏನಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ತಮ್ಮ ಸ್ವಂತ ವಹಿವಾಟುಗಳನ್ನು ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಜಂಟಿ ಉದ್ಯಮದ ತಮ್ಮ ಸ್ವಂತ ವಹಿವಾಟುಗಳ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಇತರೆ ಕೋವೆಂಚರರ್ಸ್ನ ವಹಿವಾಟುಗಳನ್ನು ಸಮೇತ ನಮೂದಿಸಬಹುದು, ಅಥವಾ ಜಂಟಿ ಉದ್ಯಮಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಪಟ್ಟ ತಮ್ಮ ವ್ಯಾವಹಾರಿಕ ವಹಿವಾಟುಗಳನ್ನು ಮಾತ್ರವೇ ನಮೂದು ಮಾಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು. ಓಕೆ, ಲೆಟ್ ಅಸ್ ಡಿಸ್ಕಸ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ದ ವೆನ್ ಈಚ್ ಕೋವೆಂಚರರ್ ಕೀಪ್ ರೆಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಆಲ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸಾಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್. ಅದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಡಿಸ್ಕಸ್ ಮಾಡೋಣ. Each co-venturer, under this method, each co-venturer make a record of his own transactions as well as the joint venture transactions affected by the other co-venturers also. Each co-venturers will get a copy of the statement of venture transactions affected by the other co-venturers. With the help of that statement, they keep record of the transactions affected by the other co-venturers. The accounts prepared under this method are joint venture account, and then another one is personal accounts of co-venturers or ಅಥವಾ ಅದರ್ co-venturers account ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ. Okay, joint venture account. Joint venture account is prepared to ascertain the profit or loss on joint venture. It is similar to that of nominal account in nature. All the venture expenses, joint venture expenses are debited to the joint venture account, and all the sales proceeds and also the collections from the joint venture are credited to the joint venture account. If the credit side of the joint venture account is more than the debit side of the joint venture account, it shows profit. Instead of that, if the debit side of the joint venture account is more than the credit side of the joint venture account, then it shows loss. Whatever may be the profit or the loss on account of joint venture will be transferred to the co-venturers account, personal accounts of co-venturers account. Okay. Another account to be prepared under this method is personal accounts of co-venturers. Personal accounts of co-venturers are also prepared in the books of each party for the purpose of recording the joint venture transactions affected by them. Each co-venturer's account will be credited with materials supplied by them to the joint venture and the cash contribution made by them to the joint venture, and also the expenses relating to the joint venture incurred by them, and then their joint personal accounts of, that means the co-venturers account will be debited with that means debited for the sale proceeds received by them, and also the collections related to the joint venture directly received by them. The profit of the joint venture will be credited to their account, and then if there is any loss, that means if the joint venture incurred a loss, that loss will be debited to the co-venturers account. So these are the two accounts to be prepared. Okay, let us know the journal entries. What are the journal entries to be passed under this method? Okay. When each co-venturer keep record of all transactions, when goods supplied to the joint venture from own business. ಸೊ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ಒಂದು ಕೋವೆಂಚರ್ನ ಪುಸ್ತಕದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಪತ್ರಗಳ ನಿರ್ವಹಣೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. That means in the books of the co-venturer, in whose books we are recording the joint venture transaction. If that co-venturer supplied the materials or the goods to the joint venture from his own business, then what will be the journal entry? Joint venture account debtor to purchases account. Joint venture account debtor to purchases account. Why the joint venture account is debited here? So joint venture account is nominal account in nature. So the goods supplied to the joint venture is treated as expenses of the joint venture and debited to the joint venture account. So the purchases account will be credited because when we purchase the goods comes into our business. But when we supply the goods to the joint venture, the goods goes out of our business. So purchase account should be credited so as to reduce the purchases. And then second entry will be when joint venture expenses paid. That is the entry for the joint venture expenses paid by the co-venturer in whose books we are keeping a record of the joint venture transactions. In that case, joint venture account debtor to cash or bank account. So ಈ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ joint venture account should be debited because the expenses of the joint venture are paid by the co-venturer. Co-venturer in the sense in whose books we are keeping record of the joint venture transactions. To cash or bank account. Why the cash or bank account is here credited? Cash or bank account. I mean, if we paid the joint venture expenses from our bank, then it reduces the balance in our bank account. If we paid out of our cash, so cash goes out of the business. Real account rule says that debit what comes in, credit what goes out. So cash or bank account should be credited, joint venture account should be debited. And the entry relating to when material supplied to or expenses paid for joint venture by other co-venturers. ಅಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಯಾವ ಅಥವಾ ಯಾರ ಒಂದು ಯಾವ ಕೋವೆಂಚರನ್ನ ಪುಸ್ತಕದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಲೆಕ್ಕಪತ್ರಗಳ ನಿರ್ವಹಣೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ, ಆ ಕೋವೆಂಚರರು ತನ್ನ ವ್ಯವಹಾರದಿಂದ ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ ಜಂಟಿ ಉದ್ಯಮಕ್ಕೆ ಮೆಟೀರಿಯಲ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನು ಸಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಡೇಟಾ ಟು ಪರ್ಚೇಸ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್, ಮತ್ತು ಆ ಕೋವೆಂಚರರು ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ಗೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಪಟ್ಟಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಖರ್ಚುಗಳನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಏನು ಎಂಟ್ರಿ ಪಾಸ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಪ್ಪ ಅಂದರೆ ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಡೇಟಾ ಕ್ಯಾಶ್ ಆರ್ ಬ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಅಂತ ಪಾಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಅದರ ಬದಲಾಗಿ ಬೇರೆ ಇನ್ನೊಬ್ಬ ಕೋವೆಂಚರರು ಮೆಟೀರಿಯಲ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನು ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ಗೆ ಸಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಅಥವಾ ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ನ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆನ್ಸಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಪಾವತಿ ಮಾಡಿದಂಥ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವಾಗಲೂ ಸಮೇತ ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ನ ಡೆಬಿಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ expenses of the joint venture. Material supplied to the joint venture, also the expenses paid by the other co-venturers. Joint venture account debtor to co-ventures account. Here co-ventures account is credited because they paid the co-ventures joint venture expenses, or they supplied the materials to the joint venture. And another entry, when the sales made, I mean ಯಾವ ಕೋವೆಂಚರ್ನ ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳನ್ನು ನಿರ್ವಹಣೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ, ಆ ಕೋವೆಂಚರರು ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ ಸಂಬಂಧಪಟ್ಟಂಗೆ ಸೇಲ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಸೇಲ್ಸ್ ಪ್ರೊಸೀಡ್ಸನ್ನು ಸ್ವೀಕರಿಸ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ಎಂಟ್ರಿಯನ್ನು ಪಾಸ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದರೆ ಕ್ಯಾಶ್ ಆರ್ ಬ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಇಟ್ ಟು ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕ್ಯಾಶ್ ಆರ್ ಬ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಡೆಬಿಟೆಡ್ ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ವಿ ಮೇಡ್ ದ ಸೇಲ್ಸ್, ವಿ ರಿಸೀವ್ಡ್ ದ ಸೇಲ್ ಪ್ರೊಸೀಡ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಕ್ರೆಡಿಟೆಡ್ ಬಿಕಾಸ್ it is the income. So that means the expenses should be debited to the joint venture account, and the incomes or the sales proceeds of the joint venture account should be credited to the joint venture account. Another entry will be when the sales made by other co-venturers. So co-venturer ಯಾವ ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾರ ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಎಂಟ್ರಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಬೇರೆ co-venturers ಏನಾದರೂ ಸೇಲ್ಸ್ ಪ್ರೊಸೀಡ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನು ಸ್ವೀಕರಿಸಿದಂಥ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ಎಂಟ್ರಿಯನ್ನು ಪಾಸ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ co-ventures account should be debited because they received the sale proceeds. Co-ventures debit the receiver who received the sale proceeds, co-venture, other co-ventures. So co-ventures account should be debited and the joint venture account should be credited. And another entry will be when joint venture makes profit. When the joint venture makes profit, then the entry will be joint venture account to profit and loss account for one share. One share in the sense in the books of the co-venturer, in whose books we are making the joint venture transaction, we are recording the joint venture transactions. ಆ co-venture ನ ಪುಸ್ತಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಲಾಸ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ಗೆ ಕ್ರೆಡಿಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಸ್ವಂತ ಶೇರನ್ನು. ಸೊ ಅದರ್ co-venturers ಶೇರ್ ಆಫ್ ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ ಅನ್ನು ಏನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಅವರ ಖಾತೆಗಳಿಗೆ ಟು co-ventures ಅಕೌಂಟ್ಗೆ ಕ್ರೆಡಿಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. So joint venture account to profit and loss account, to co-ventures account. To profit and loss account, own share of profit. To co-ventures account, other co-ventures share of profit. And another entry in this concern is when joint venture incurs loss. Okay, if there occurs loss on account of joint venture, then the above entry will be reversed. That is, profit and loss account should be debited with the own share of loss, and then co-ventures account should be debited with co-ventures share of loss, and the joint venture account should be credited here because there occurs a loss. Okay, and then when the final settlement to co-ventures, so ಇಲ್ಲಿ co-ventures ನ ಮಧ್ಯೆ ಇರತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಫೈನಲ್ ಸೆಟಲ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ when the amount is paid to the co-venturers, ಒಬ್ಬ co-venturer ಬೇರೆ co-venturersಗೆ ಅಮೌಂಟನ್ನು ಪಾವತಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಅದರ್ co-ventures account should be debited because they are the receiver of the cash. So co-ventures account should be debited and cash or bank account should be credited because real account rule says that debit what comes in, credit what goes out. So cash or bank account should be credited. So when amount is received from the co-venturers on the final settlement, if the co-venturer received the amount from other co-venturers, then the cash or bank account should be debited and the other co-venturers account should be credited. These are all the journal entries to be passed under this method. Okay, let us have a glance about the ledger accounts. So joint venture account. Okay, see the specimen of joint venture account. Here, debit side and credit side. The joint venture account is debited with to purchase account for the purpose of goods supplied from one stock. That is from the co-venture whose books of accounts the joint venture transactions are we are recording. And then to bank account, that is for the expenses paid by our own cash or bank. And then to co-ventures account. Here, to co-ventures account is on the debit side. Third item, to co-ventures account for the materials supplied by the other co-venturers or for the purpose of expenses paid by the other co-venturers. And then fourth entry is to profit and loss account on account of the profit on joint venture. The profit will be distributed on one share. ಸೊ ಓನ್ ಶೇರ್. ಯಾವ ಕೋವೆಂಚರ್ನ ಪುಸ್ತಕದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಲೆಕ್ಕಪತ್ರ ನಿರ್ವಹಣೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ ಆತನ ಒಂದು ಪಾಲಿನ ಒಂದು ಲಾಭದ ಒಂದು ಭಾಗವನ್ನು ಟು ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಲಾಸ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಅಂತ ಬರಿತೀವಿ. ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಟು ಕೋವೆಂಚರ್ಸ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಅಂತ ಇತರೆ ಒಂದು ಕೋವೆಂಚರ್ಸ್ನ ಲಾಭದ ಒಂದು ಪಾಲನ್ನು ಟು ಕೋವೆಂಚರ್ಸ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಅವರ ಒಂದು ಇದರ ಐಟಮಲ್ಲಿ ಬರಿತೀವಿ. ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ come to the credit side of the joint venture account. So joint venture account is credited with by bank account for sale of goods or for cash. If we make the sales of joint venture, then by bank account, that means joint venture account should be credited with bank account. And then instead of us, other co-ventures make a sale of the joint venture. That means if they receive the sale proceeds of the joint venture, then other co-ventures account, that by other co-ventures account, so joint venture account should be credited with other co-ventures account. Co-ventures account should be debited for the sale of the goods through co-ventures. And if the joint venture, that means if the joint venture leads to loss, then our own share of loss should be entered as by profit and loss account, and other co-ventures loss, share of loss should be entered as by co-ventures account with co-ventures share of loss. This is the specimen of joint venture account. And then co-ventures account. Okay, have a glance at the specimen of co-ventures account. Here the co-ventures account is debited with sale proceeds, that means for sale of goods through co-ventures to joint venture account. And then to joint venture account once again for goods taken over by the co-ventures. If the co-ventures taken over the goods or the any assets, then their account should be debited. And also to cash or bank account for amount received on final settlement, their account should be debited on account of amount or the cash or bank account to be received on final or full settlement. And co-ventures account is credited for the items for cash contribution. If they contribute the cash to the joint venture, then their account should be credited. And if the joint venture expenses are incurred by them or materials supplied by them to the joint venture, then the co-ventures account should be credited by joint venture account for purchase of goods or expenses incurred by the co-ventures. And then co-ventures account should be credited by one more item by joint venture account for commission or salary payable to the co-ventures. If they are entitled to receive a commission or salary, then joint venture account should be debited and co-ventures account should be credited. And then if they are, that means if the co-ventures are to be received the amount in full settlement, then co-ventures account should be credited with by cash or bank account for amount payable on full settlement to the other co-ventures account. Okay, with this we successfully completed today's class. Thank you for watching this video. Okay, let us meet you in next video.